My name is William Blunt, and you're listening to the Political Palooza Podcast. We are here today to discuss the prevalent issue of gun control in America. As many shootings take place, more and more people are taking a stance on gun control. I am joined today by two individuals who take opposing sides on this issue, John Mercer and Governor Morris. John, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, William. This topic is very important to me, as I was appointed as a major in the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. We fought that war for the personal liberties of our people, including the right to bear arms, which makes me very excited to join you and Governor Morris today.
Thank you, John. Now, Governor, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Governor Morris, a Federalist representing the state of New York and a signer of the Constitution. As a Federalist, I side with gun control laws to rest in the hands of the federal government rather than the states.
Thank you, Governor. Before we embark, I would like to briefly explain the history of gun control in America. The history behind gun control is a relatively lengthy one. In 1934, the National Firearms Act was passed, which regulated the manufacture, sale, and possession of automatic weapons. The Federal Firearms Act of 1938 placed limitations on ordinary firearms and required firearm owners to have a license. The Gun Control Act of 1968 was passed with the purpose of keeping firearms out of the hands of those who are underage, have a criminal background, or have incompetence. So many other acts and laws have been passed by our legislature over the years our nation has existed, but if I were to explain them all to you, I'm afraid we would run out of time. I'm sure you two are ready to jump in on this issue, but first, I would like to give insight on a recent event regarding gun control. A school shooting occurred at Parkland High School, which is located in the state of Florida, on February 14th of 2018. The shooter, Nicholas Cruz, who was 19, legally attained a rifle and proceeded to kill 17 people at the high school. And the ability for Cruz to obtain the weapon has created much controversy. Cruz bought a Smith & Wesson M&P rifle, which is semi-automatic. But if Cruz wanted to buy a handgun, he could not because the age limit is 21 in Florida. He could, however, legally buy the semi-automatic rifle because he was over 18. Cruz had also been to a mental health clinic, but under federal law, you cannot deny anyone a firearm unless they are legally declared a mental defective. My source regarding this event was an article written by the National Post. So now the question is, should gun control be a federal issue or state issue? Before we start, I would like you two to hold your opinions when the other person is speaking and respect their ideas. At the end of the segment, we will designate a time for you to argue directly against your opponent's claims. Now, for John Mercer, where do you stand?
Every state is different, and the individuals in every state should be represented by their local governments. The federal government should be able to make sure that everybody has the right to bear arms. But I cannot understand how you guys can argue that the federal government should be representing the people inside of a small county in Wyoming over a topic like gun control. The people of America are much better represented by somebody that grew up in their hometown or somebody that they can send emails to who lives locally. Representation is key.
Great point, Mr. Mercer. Now, Governor, why should gun control be a federal issue rather than a state issue?
Alright, if we as a country had laws applying to all the states, which means having gun control regulated at the federal level, it'd be much easier to manage rather than keeping up with 50 different regulations on firearms, which could be a major hazard considering the damage already impacting the United States by the actions seen thus far. My reason is simply for the sake of the danger Americans could be at stake of if laws are different in every other state. For instance, I support the Second Amendment, but if a state had strict gun laws compared to another state, and a citizen from that state had a gun on them in public, citizens in that state would be terrified due to the difference in law structure. Only because it would be totally abnormal for a citizen to have a gun in public, unless they're involved in crime, motivation for a future crime, or if they were an out-of-state citizen. As a Federalist, I believe in more federal power than state power. This being said, I believe that as a united nation, we as a country should decide the laws of our land rather than 50 states deciding for themselves. Otherwise, why not just have each state secede and have 50 separate nations when we as a nation should set
Mr. Mercer,
boundaries and laws to ensure the safety of all the people.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Mercer, we have a designated time at the end of this segment where you can argue against Mr. Morris. So I'd like you to hold your opinion.
Sorry.
Well, now I can see that you want to share your input. So would you like to further explain your stance?
I'll say it again, every state is different. People living in the middle of New York City aren't going to be hunting as often as somebody living in, let's say, a rural area of Mississippi. And the laws should be changed locally to fit the daily lives of their people. Somebody that is in the middle of a city would not need a rifle, but may want to have a concealed carry to feel protected in that urban environment. However, a person in a rural area that is risking wildlife coming onto their property, a rifle for them would be much more logical to carry over a concealed carry.
Thank you. Governor, would you like to add another perspective on this issue?
You know, I think I would. Gun control is a prime example of federalism due to the fact that it's shared by both the federal and state governments. The federal government should be the one creating gun control laws, but the states should be the ones administering them. The federal government sets restrictions on laws, while the states set restrictions for individual weapons that go along with the federal law. However, there should be one law that coincides with all the states. Gun control affects the safety of the citizens, so there needs to be laws that exist in every state. It is unfair to our citizens to allow people in one state to be safer than those in another.
Very interesting. Now, John, why don't you further explain to the governor and the viewers your stance on the issue?
Discussing the topic of gun control goes back to the right to bear arms in our Bill of Rights, which I fully stand by as a veteran myself. I fully agree that we should be able to own guns in our country, but I do believe that we must have more regulations to make sure that we have safety for our people. In the Revolutionary War, we fought for every single American to have their God-given rights, but protecting those people is even more important of an issue. Whether it is domestic or foreign threats, our people of America must feel safe in this beautiful country, and that is through each state having the protection they need through guns, regulated and controlled by their local representatives.
Whoa, that's ridiculous. Settle down, man. How can you plague our viewers with these horrible ideologies? Thanks.
Mr. Morris. As I said to Mr. Mercer earlier in the segment, we have a designated time at the end of the segment where you can argue against him.
All right,
Now, thank you.
We get it.
Is there a point you would like to make?
Yes. As said previously, I believe that the federal and state governments should work together, not as the sole decision makers. However, some states that have the tougher restrictions have statistically proven to be more crime-driven than states with less restrictions. For example, Chicago and Detroit have one of the highest murder rates, not just in the United States, but in the entire world. Also, those states have significantly higher restrictions than other states. Coincidence? I think not. Democratic and liberal government officials have shown to be tougher on gun restrictions, while conservatives and Republicans have shown to be less restrictive on firearms. So, as a Federalist, I believe that not only should the federal and state governments work together, but they should keep each other in check of restrictions in firearm laws to prevent mass shootings and incidents as seen.
All right, so here's the fun part that you both have just been dying to get to.
Yeah.
Here in this episode, we will give you guys a chance to refute your opponent's claims. Governor, start us off.
Anti-Federalists would perhaps argue that states know best for their own citizens in terms of gun control laws. All right. However, that does not exempt the states from federal law. As the United States, the federal government needs to work to create the best restrictions and/or situations possible for the American citizens in order to create a safe America. People in one state should not be less safe than people in another state because of state legislature.
Now, Mr. Mercer, would you like to wrap up your argument by disproving Mr. Morris?
Yes. Governor Morris, to your point regarding people walking around with guns in different states and making them feel less safe than in others, it's completely illogical. People know what state they are in, and if you plan on traveling to another state while carrying your firearm, you would research that state's gun law. Americans may be lazy sometimes, but it is almost impossible to say that people would be lazy enough to not spend 5 minutes researching gun laws before traveling.
I mean, I don't know.
To your last point on the country deciding laws over the 50 states, regarding most laws, it is smart to have local governments make the laws for their citizens. There's no need for a person in the middle of New York City to be walking around through the city with a large assault rifle. But a rancher in Wyoming, on the other hand, taking care of his or her farm and protecting it from wildlife would have a need to do so.
Thank you both. So to conclude this eventful episode, we have great arguments from both sides on whether gun control should be a state or federal issue. Now, I wish to see how the viewers feel after listening in today. I challenge you to look at the facts presented here and look into other articles and stances of gun control to create your own opinion on this topic and to further educate yourselves on political topics. Leave your opinions in the comments section and like and subscribe. And I would also like to thank Governor Morris and John Mercer for joining me on this edition of the Political Palooza podcast. And I hope you enjoyed and tune in next week for another exciting debate.
Thank you.
Good night.